Hi students, welcome to lesson number 13 on rural economy. A brief introduction for the lesson. India is predominantly a rural country, and as per the 2011 census, 68.8% of the country's population and 72.4% of the workforce reside in rural areas. Most of the population of villages depends on agriculture. Agriculture forms the backbone of the country's economy. For centuries together, the Indian village has been a self-sufficient and self-contained economy. During the past 50 years, rural reconstruction and development have been the major thrust of economic planning, which has caused a rapid transformation in the Indian rural economic structure. These changes have taken place in spheres such as land reforms, agriculture, animal husbandry, supplies and marketing, village industries, rural leadership, village administration, etc. With the help of the rural development programs, a cultivator is able to take advantage of the modern technological facilities in his agricultural operations. These cultivators are now using modern agriculture implements and high yielding varieties of seeds and fertilizers. This is evident from the fact that in 1991, nearly 74% of its population lived in some 5,80,000 villages, and about 2/3 of its workforce was engaged in agriculture and allied activities in rural areas. Agriculture and allied activities contributed about 29% of India's gross domestic product, that is GDP, at factor cost at the current prices in 1994 and 1995. In a predominantly agrarian country like India, rural development is since qua non of national development and agriculture development, a prerequisite for rural development. Therefore, in such a country, agriculture development should form the foundation for national development. The role of agriculture in economic development has been recognized and discussed since the time of the physiocrats. Now, the objectives of the lesson. The objectives are that they help the students to understand the concept of rural economy. They will get an idea about the various sectors on rural economy, and they are also able to know the importance of rural economy in India. Now, what are the various features of rural economy? Generally speaking, the concept of economy deals with production, distribution and consumption of material goods and services. Material goods are produced with certain means, raw materials, technology and labor. Moreover, people enter into social relations for organization of production. Produced goods are distributed among the various selections of society. Society also fulfills the need of different kinds of services. Further, we find that historical experiences of human society show changes in economic life over a period of time, which is accompanied by changes in society as a whole. We have therefore taken a historical perspective to describe rural economy in India. Let us first define the term rural. Such criteria as demographic, economic, ecological and socio-cultural are used to identify what is rural. The popular definition is that it is an area pertaining to the country as distinguished from a city or a town. Agriculture is its main economic activity. In the case of rural economy, land is the primary means of production. Land is made fertile by human labor. The rural people live in villages and produce a variety of crops by means of technique and the labor power. Moreover, village and cottage industries also have been traditionally an important part of rural economy. Rural economy, a cottage industry, is a human-based industry which generally produces finished goods. Now, we will try to understand what is the traditional rural economy. Rural economy has been dominant in India since ages. Agriculture is its base, which provides food for the whole population and raw materials for rural and urban industries. In 1981, 76% people of the total population lived in villages. 63% of India's population were dependent on agriculture as their source of livelihood, and 60% of the working population was engaged in agriculture. Later figures also show that 74.3% in 1991 and 72% of the population in 2001 lived in villages. Agriculture was a means of livelihood for 60.5% and 58% of the total workforce in the year 1991 and 2001 respectively. Now, let us now understand the nature of rural economy in ancient and medieval periods of time. Now, the ancient period. Rural economy in India goes back to the Indus Valley civilization. This was an urban civilization having a wide agriculture base. Plough cultivation was known to the rural people. Its evidence was found in archaeological excavations at Kalibangan in Ganganagar, Rajasthan. Crops like wheat, rice, peas, sesame and cotton were grown in the floodplains of the Indus River and its tributaries. Food grains from the rural areas were stored for the townsmen. This is testified by the existence of granaries at various Indus towns. Potters made earthenwares and metal workers manufactured articles of copper and bronze. The chief basis of Indus urbanization could be the taxes and tributes collected from the peasants living in the vicinity of the towns. So, this form of economy however changed to pastoral and semi-nomadic way of life. Now, the medieval period. A thoughtful combination of agriculture and village cottage industries based on agricultural products characterizes the medieval rural economy. Production was mainly for local consumption, but a part of the rural produce entered local trade. Villages bought only a limited number of things from outside like salt, iron and a few consumer goods. Money hardly entered into the transaction in the villages. The Jajmani system continued with a mode of payment of kind in the medieval period. Now, the rural economy in the colonial period. The rural economy underwent some important changes during the colonial rule in India, like deindustrialization, new land revenue settlements like the Zamindari, Raitwari and Mahalwari system and commercialization of agriculture were some of the important features of the rural economy during the colonial period. The measures introduced by the British also caused a considerable strain to the Jajmani system that existed in the medieval period. Now, we will understand what was rural economy after independence. Since independence, a lot of changes have taken place in the rural economy scene, such as first one, that is land reforms. After independence of India from the British rule, various land reform measures were introduced to change the agrarian structure for establishment of a prosperous and egalitarian society. So, now let us look at the changes in the agrarian structure. The first change is the abolition of the Zamindari system. Its objective was to bring the cultivators into direct relationship with the state through eliminating the intermediary interest of the zamindars and the chain of sub-infeudation. The intermediaries were allowed to retain their khudkasti, that is land for personal cultivation. The rest of the land has to be with the tenants, for which the zamindars were compensated by the revenue. This measure led to eviction of tenants on a large scale by the zamindars who claimed major portion of their land. Second change is the tenancy reform measure that was taken by the state, which aimed at providing security of tenure, reduction of rent and facilitating acquisition of ownership rights by tenant cultivators. Usually, when tenants were found to be cultivating the land for a continuous period of 5 years, they were declared permanent or protected tenants who could not be easily evicted by the landowner. So, land rent was reduced. It was 1/4 or 1/6 of the value of the gross produce. The tenants got the right to acquire ownership of land they cultivated by paying rent for a limited number of years, say 8 years or 10 years. A substantial number of tenants acquired security of tenure and ownership of land, but this measure also led to eviction of tenants. Subtle and concealed tenancy arrangements were made. The phenomena of sharecropping became more common. Landlords continued to exploit the tenants. The other change was ceilings were imposed on present family holdings as well as on future acquisition. The state had to acquire surplus land from the big landowners with due compensation and distribute the same among the marginal peasants, small peasants and landless agricultural laborers. However, delay in enactment and implementation of the law enabled the landlords either to sell off their surplus land or to partition the land and transfer the same in the name of relatives and friends, and thereby evading the law to a great extent. Another land legislation concern was consolidation of fragmented land holdings of landholders. Once implemented, this measure would promote adequate investment of capital and inputs in land and boost efficiency and economy in agriculture. Now, we look at what are the impact of land reforms. The overall impact of land reform was far from satisfactory. Smaller tenants were evicted from land in large number and forced into a highly exploitative system of sharecropping. They received much less protection and suffered more than the bigger ones. Continued dominance of landlord was maintained. Now, let us understand what is the size and structure of the rural economy. India's economy can be thought of as a comprising two main sectors, namely the rural sector and the non-rural sector. The rural sector is in turn composed of two main subsectors, that is the agriculture subsector and the non-agriculture subsector. The agriculture subsector comprises agriculture and allied economic activities such as crop husbandry, animal husbandry and dairying, fisheries, poultry and forestry. The non-agriculture subsector consists of economic activities relating to industry, business and services. Industry here refers to cottage and village industries like khadi, handloom, handicrafts, etc. Business refers to micro enterprises trading of general goods, small shops, petty traders, whereas services refers to transport communications, banking, input supply, marketing of farm and non-farm produce, etc. The main stakeholders of the rural sector include farmers, agricultural and non-agricultural laborers, artisans, traders, moneylenders and those engaged in providing such services as transport, communications, processing, banking and education and extension. Forests are a very valuable renewable resources providing a vital life support system. The rural economy also helps for a source of foreign exchange. Agriculture is an important source of earning foreign exchange, which is needed for importing capital goods for the rapidly expanding industrial sector. The value of agriculture export accounted for about 18 to 20% of the total value of exports from India. Agriculture makes its contribution to the net foreign exchange earning through displacement of current and potential imports and through expanded exports. It is market for industrial goods and services. The agriculture sector provides a ready and big market for many manufactured goods and services provided by the secondary and tertiary sectors. Such goods include pesticides, insecticides, farm machinery, pumping sets, cattle, poultry feed, fish feed, pipelines, fencing materials, veterinary medicines and vehicles. Rural people also buy consumer goods manufactured by the industrial sector. In fact, now many big companies have their eyes on rural market for their products and services. Thus, increased farm income and purchasing power is a valuable stimulus to industrial development. Third point is the source of cheap food. Economic development is characterized by the substantial increase in the demand for food. Apart from autonomous changes in demand, the annual rate of increase in the demand for food is given by D is equal to P plus NG, where P and G are the rates of growth and population and per capita income respectively. And it is the income elasticity of demand for food. So, with the annual compound population growth rate of 2.14 to 2.88% per annum registered in India during the last decade, and with a modest rise of 3% in real per capita income per annum, the annual rate of increase in demand for food in India is around 4%. Now, we will try to understand the role of the agriculture subsector in rural economy. The rural sector constituted the basic foundation of India's economy. No program of national development can ever succeed unless it is built upon this foundation. More specifically, the rural sector in general and its agricultural subsector in particular contributes to the growth and development of India's economy in the following ways, that is, contribution to GDP. The agriculture subsector occupied a place of pride in India's economy and will continue to do so in the foreseeable future. Agriculture contributed 34.7% of the GDP at current prices in 1980-81, but its share declined to 28.7% in 1994-95. As a matter of fact, the share of agriculture has been gradually declining ever since 1950-51, when it was 56.46%. The declining share of agriculture in GDP does not, however, mean a retrogression of agriculture. It only means that the secondary and tertiary sectors of the economy are expanding at a higher rate. And this is what one would anticipate as a process of economic development moves forward. This has happened in developed countries all over the world. In general, the more developed a country, the smaller is the share of agriculture in the national income. It is the mainstay of livelihood and employment. A peculiar feature of India's economy is a very high proportion of the country's population living in rural areas. In 1951, it was about 83%, and in 1991, about 74% people staying in rural areas. Similarly, though the share of the agriculture sector in GDP has been declining over time, the proportion of population dependent upon agriculture has been more or less stagnant around 60% since 1961. So, according to the 1991 population census, 59% of rural workers in the country were engaged in agriculture, of whom 35.2% were cultivators and 23.8% agricultural laborers. This means that agriculture is a main source of livelihood and employment for about 2/3 of India's population. Another major role is a source of raw materials. Agriculture is a principal source of raw materials for India's leading industries such as sugar, cotton, jute, textiles, leather, tobacco and edible oils. Many other industries like fruit preservations and processing, dal mills, handloom weaving, gourd making and oil crushing also depend upon agriculture as a source of raw materials. The rate of growth in all these industries is thus dependent on the rate of growth in the agriculture sector, and agriculture development is a prerequisite for the development. Now, we will try to understand the role of the non-agriculture subsector. In most developing countries, including India, the rural labor force has been growing rapidly, but employment opportunities dwindling. As the land available for expansion of agriculture becomes increasingly scarce, opportunities for non-farm employment must expand if deepening rural poverty is to be avoided. Given the expected growth and composition of large-scale urban industries, they are unlikely to be able to absorb the rising tide of workers migrating from the countryside to the cities. Looking toward the 21st century, we must slow the process of urban spread and its high social and environmental costs such as congestion, population and skyrocketing land cost. Expansion of the rural non-agriculture sector with its emphasis on labor intensive and small scale enterprises widens income opportunities for the poor, including small farmers, the landless and women, enabling them to even outscream fluctuations in their incomes. The relative importance of the rural non-agriculture subsector and the composition of the various economic activities included in the sector differ widely from region to region in India. Broadly defined, this subsectors includes economic activities outside agriculture carried out in villages and varying in size from household to small factories. Some examples of these activities are cottage, tiny village and small scale manufacturing and processing industries, trade, transportation, construction and services of various kinds. In India, cottage and village industries have been an important occupation of landless and other people in villages of ages. As a matter of fact, agriculture and rural industries are complementary to each other. The Khadi and Village Industries Commission has identified 95 village industries for government support. These industries are divided into the following 7 categories, and they are: the first one, mineral based industry; second, forest based industry; third, agro based industry; fourth, polymer and chemical based industries; fifth, engineering and non-conventional energy based industries; sixth, textile industry other than khadi; seventh, service industry. Thus, the non-agriculture subsector of India's rural sector also occupies an important place in India's economy as a source of income and employment opportunities for the landless. Now, we will try to look at the impact of new economic policy on the rural economy. Since 1991, Indian economy has been exposed to economic liberalization and globalization in line with structural adjustment and stabilization policies initiated by International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Structural adjustment policy advocated privatization, import liberalization and export-led growth, and while stabilization policy emphasizes reduction in fiscal deficit through withdrawal of subsidies given to industry, trade and agriculture. There has been a shift in the Indian economic policy from state-oriented development strategy to market-oriented development, leaving the decisions of production and distribution to the market signals. The impact of the economic reforms on the rural economy has been in varied forms. The reform measures such as the reduction in fiscal deficit, reduction of subsidies, devaluation of rupee, export orientation and reduction of agriculture credit adversely affected the rural poor, especially in terms of food security, which relates with production, distribution and pricing of the food grains. The agriculture sector was worst affected by the fiscal contraction, which invariably resulted in disproportionate cut in capital expenditure. Agriculture sector is a mainstay of the rural Indian economy, around which socio-economic privileges and deprivation resolve, and any change in its structure is likely to have a corresponding impact on the existing pattern of the social equity. The shrinkage of the flow of resources to the rural sector, a misconceived interest rate policy which discriminated against agriculture, a sickening rural delivery credit system, the emergence of a new banking culture nurtured by reforms which is far from friendly to agriculture and rural development, all go against the interests of rural economy. To sum up, despite fast expansion of cities and towns and much better amenities and economic opportunities in urban areas, more than 2/3 of the population in India still resides in rural areas. Based on population projection, it is estimated that even in 2050, more than half of India will be living in rural areas. Therefore, transformation of rural economy is essential for overall and inclusive development of the Indian society.